One of the world's most famous airline captains announced he's living with Alzheimer's disease. Captain Chesley Sullenberger recently revealed his diagnosis.
For 16 years, one name has meant a single thing to the world. A captain who turned a doomed flight into a landing so calm that people simply started calling it a miracle. He never sought the spotlight that followed him afterward, yet he used it for decades to push for safer skies, safer cockpits, and safer passengers everywhere. Now, at 75, that same steady man is asking the public for something different. Not applause, not another tribute, but understanding. This week, Captain Chesley Sullenberger shared news that has quietly changed how his story will be remembered, and why courage still matters most when nobody is watching. A fighter pilot raised on the Texas plains. Chesley Burnett Sullenberger III was born on January 23, 1951, in the small city of Denison, Texas, the son of a family descended from Swiss-German immigrants who had settled generations earlier near Winningen, Switzerland. He grew up with one younger sister, Mary, in a household that valued discipline and quiet achievement over noise. And those values shaped him long before anyone in Denison imagined he would one day be a household name. As a boy, he built model aircraft carriers and toy planes, and he later said his fascination with flight took hold after watching military jets pass overhead from a nearby Air Force base. He was an unusually gifted student, consistently ranking in the top percentile across every academic subject, and by age 11, his test scores were strong enough to qualify him for Mensa International. In high school, he served as president of the Latin Club, played first-chair flute, and graduated near the very top of a class of roughly 350 students. Away from the classroom, he had already begun chasing the sky itself, earning his glider license at 14 and learning to fly a small Aeronca Champion at 16 from a private airstrip close to his family home. That early training carried him straight into the United States Air Force Academy, where he entered with the class of 1973 and was quickly chosen for a competitive cadet glider program. By the end of his first year, he was already serving as an instructor pilot for fellow cadets, a rare distinction for someone so young. When he graduated, he received the Outstanding Cadet in Airmanship Award as the top flyer of his class, a title that foreshadowed a career built almost entirely around technical precision under pressure. The Air Force sent him next to Purdue University, where he completed a master's degree in industrial and organizational psychology, a field that would later inform his lifelong interest in how people behave, communicate, and make decisions during moments of crisis. He then trained on the T-37 and T-38 aircraft before earning his wings and moving into the F-4 Phantom II, flying with fighter squadrons stationed in England and Nevada, and rising to the rank of captain. During those years, he also served on aircraft accident investigation boards, quietly building the exact expertise that would define the rest of his life. By 1980, he had left active military service and joined the airline industry, eventually settling with U.S. Airways and its predecessor carriers, where he would spend the next 3 decades logging tens of thousands of flight hours. Alongside his flying duties, he worked as a flight instructor, an accident investigator for the National Transportation Safety Board, and a safety chairman within the Airline Pilots Association, helping shape protocols that airlines still rely on today. His safety work eventually influenced a Federal Aviation Administration advisory circular, and he was instrumental in developing the Crew Resource Management course that U.S. Airways adopted, a program he personally taught to hundreds of crew members over the years. In 2007, he founded Safety Reliability Methods, a consulting firm built to help organizations strengthen performance and reliability across high-risk industries, a venture that let him apply lessons learned in the cockpit to hospitals, factories, and other settings where a single mistake can cost lives. Working alongside researchers from NASA, he co-authored a paper examining the specific contexts that tend to produce dangerous errors in aviation, an early sign of the analytical mindset he would later bring to public advocacy. Few of his passengers over those years had any idea that the calm voice on the intercom belonged to a man who had spent his entire adult life studying exactly what goes wrong inside a cockpit, and how a well-trained crew can still bring people home safely. The flight that made him a household name. On January 15, 2009, Sullenberger was in command of U.S. Airways Flight 1549, an Airbus A320, climbing out of LaGuardia Airport in New York bound for Charlotte, North Carolina. Barely 2 minutes after takeoff, the aircraft struck a flock of Canada geese, and both engines lost power almost instantly, leaving him and First Officer Jeffrey Skiles gliding a powerless commercial jet over one of the most densely populated cities on Earth. Air traffic controllers offered him a return to LaGuardia or a diversion to nearby Teterboro Airport, but Sullenberger quickly judged that neither runway was reachable in time, and made the decision instead to ditch the plane on the Hudson River. What followed became one of the most studied emergency landings in aviation history. Sullenberger later described the engines going silent as a genuinely shocking sound, admitting that the seconds before touchdown produced the worst sinking feeling he had ever experienced in a lifetime of flying. Even so, the landing itself was smooth enough that the aircraft stayed largely intact on the water, giving all 155 passengers and crew members time to evacuate safely onto the wings and into rescue boats that arrived within minutes. Sullenberger walked the aisle twice to confirm the cabin was empty before he became the very last person off the sinking plane. Investigators from the National Transportation Safety Board later concluded that ditching in the river was the correct call, since standard emergency procedures for engine failure are built around cruising altitude rather than the seconds right after takeoff, and any attempt to turn back risked a crash inside a crowded neighborhood. New York's mayor at the time nicknamed him Captain Cool for his composure, though Sullenberger has since admitted that the calm exterior masked real fear, and that he struggled with symptoms resembling post-traumatic stress in the weeks that followed, including sleeplessness and recurring flashbacks. Even heroes, it turned out, carried the weight of what almost happened. Tributes arrived quickly and from every direction. President George W. Bush called personally to thank him. President-elect Barack Obama invited the entire crew to the inauguration just days later, and both chambers of Congress passed formal resolutions honoring Sullenberger, Skiles, the cabin crew, and the first responders who helped pull everyone from the icy water. The city of New York handed him a key to the city. Danville, California, made him an honorary police officer, and Time magazine ranked him second on its list of the year's most influential people. Sullenberger, Skiles, and the cabin crew were later honored with a standing ovation during the Super Bowl pregame ceremony just weeks after the landing, a moment that underscored how quickly their story had reached beyond aviation circles and into everyday American life. The rescue itself relied on far more than one pilot's steady hands. Nearby ferry operators and tugboat crews reached the sinking aircraft within minutes, pulling passengers from the wings and from the frigid river before hypothermia could set in, an effort that investigators later credited as essential to the fact that not a single life was lost. The aircraft itself was eventually recovered from the river and now sits on permanent display at what is today known as the Sullenberger Aviation Museum in Charlotte, a facility renamed in his honor to keep the story of that January afternoon accessible to future visitors. For a man famously described by friends as shy and reticent, that sudden wave of global attention was almost as disorienting as the crash landing itself. Building a second career around safety and service. Rather than disappearing from public life once the headlines faded, Sullenberger spent the next decade turning his unexpected fame into a genuine second career built around education and advocacy. He continued flying commercially until 2010, when he retired after 30 years with the airline, closing out his career with a final flight from Fort Lauderdale to Charlotte, alongside Skiles and several of the original Flight 1549 passengers. That same year, France awarded him the rank of officer in its Legion of Honor, and he served as Grand Marshal of the Tournament of Roses Parade, cementing his transition from working pilot to public figure. In 2009, he partnered with journalist Jeffrey Zaslow to write Highest Duty, a best-selling memoir that went well beyond the Hudson River landing to explore his father's death by ending his life in 1995 and the private grief that followed, a disclosure that later turned Sullenberger into an outspoken advocate for mental health awareness. The book became the foundation for the 2016 film Sully, directed by Clint Eastwood and starring Tom Hanks in the title role, which introduced an entirely new generation to a story many had assumed they already knew. He followed his memoir with a second book in 2012 focused on leadership and vision, further building his reputation as a voice on courage under pressure, rather than simply a pilot who got lucky once. Between 2009 and 2013, Sullenberger and Skiles continued their partnership beyond the cockpit by serving as co-chairs of the Experimental Aircraft Association's Young Eagles program, an initiative dedicated to inspiring the next generation of aviators. Through free introductory flights and educational outreach, the program has introduced millions of young people to the world of general aviation, encouraging countless children to consider careers in aviation and aerospace. Their commitment to aviation education and mentorship earned them the organization's prestigious Freedom of Flight Award, recognizing not only their heroism on Flight 1549, but also their lasting impact on the future of flight. Sullenberger's expertise also became highly sought after in the media. In 2011, CBS News appointed him as its aviation and safety analyst, a position in which he explained complex aviation incidents, aircraft systems, and safety procedures to millions of viewers whenever major aviation stories dominated the headlines. His calm, measured insights made him one of the country's most trusted voices on aviation safety. That same year, he addressed world leaders, executives, and policymakers at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, sharing lessons on crisis leadership, decision-making under extreme pressure, and the importance of building high-performance systems that prepare organizations for unexpected emergencies. His continued contributions were recognized with the Tony Jannus Award in 2018 for Distinguished Achievement in Commercial Aviation and the American Speech-Language Hearing Association's Annie Glenn Award in 2021, honoring his exceptional public communication and advocacy throughout his distinguished career. Sullenberger also became one of aviation's most consistent watchdogs, publicly criticizing Boeing and federal regulators after the 737 MAX crashes and testifying before Congress that the disasters should never have happened because of what he called a system of aircraft design and certification that had failed the flying public. He argued that an overly close relationship between manufacturers and regulators had allowed warning signs to go unaddressed, and he continued raising similar concerns years later when a new FAA administrator declined to commit to existing pilot experience requirements. In 2021, President Biden nominated him to serve as the United States Ambassador to the International Civil Aviation Organization, a role confirmed by the Senate that placed the former airline captain at the center of global conversations about flight safety standards. He presented his credentials in Montreal in February 2022 and served in the post through that summer, capping a decades-long transformation from a quiet regional pilot into one of the most trusted names in international aviation policy. Away from the podium, his private life stayed remarkably steady. He married fitness instructor Lori Henry in 1989, and the couple settled in Danville, California, where they adopted 2 daughters, Katie and Kelly, and built the kind of ordinary family routine that stood in sharp contrast to his public reputation. Friends and colleagues have long described that contrast as central to who he really is, a man capable of extraordinary composure in a crisis, who nonetheless spent most evenings focused on homework, dinner, and the small rituals of raising 2 kids in the suburbs. Facing a new kind of challenge with familiar courage. This week, Sullenberger revealed the news that has reframed how the public understands his final chapter. Speaking through a personal statement shared with several outlets, he explained that he had been diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's disease in August of last year, after noticing subtle shifts in his own memory, including trouble recalling names, repeating stories he had already told, and disrupted sleep. He described himself as being at the very beginning of what he called a long journey, choosing deliberately plain language over anything dramatic, much the same way he once described the technical details of a water landing rather than dressing it up for effect. In his statement, Sullenberger explained that he is working closely with Dr. Gil Rabinovici at UCSF Medical Center in San Francisco, and that the diagnosis has pushed him to think differently about what it means to keep serving others. He said that for years, whenever people asked him about the successful outcome of Flight 1549, he liked to say that courage can be contagious, and that the same idea now applies to facing this disease openly rather than privately. He framed his decision to speak publicly as an attempt to spare other families the isolation that so often accompanies an Alzheimer's diagnosis, telling the public that he now considers himself part of a much larger community moving forward together. His wife, Lori, also offered her own reflection on the diagnosis, describing him as the same steady presence he has always been, both before and after the Hudson landing, and now again after this new challenge. She said that steadiness continues to guide the family as they adjust to what lies ahead, adding that although the future remains uncertain, they intend to keep living fully and finding joy in ordinary moments. Medical experts note that there is currently no cure for Alzheimer's disease, and that symptoms typically progress over time even when they begin mildly, though improved detection tools and newer treatments have given many recently diagnosed patients more options than were available in previous decades. Longtime colleagues have pointed out that this is far from the first time Sullenberger has chosen transparency over comfort. He was similarly candid years earlier about struggling with symptoms resembling post-traumatic stress after the Hudson landing, and about the grief that followed the loss of his father, who ended his life. Both disclosures that helped normalize conversations many public figures still avoid. Coverage of his announcement noted that he described the early symptoms in his own words, keeping the same measured tone that once helped calm an entire cabin of frightened passengers 30,000 feet above the Hudson River. Alzheimer's disease affects millions of families across the country, and public figures who speak openly about an early diagnosis often help push the condition out of the shadows and into ordinary conversation. Dr. Rabinovici and his colleagues at UCSF have been at the forefront of research into earlier detection methods, and Sullenberger's decision to name his physician publicly reflects the same trust in expertise that guided him through decades of technical safety work. His statement made clear that he does not view the diagnosis as a reason to withdraw from public life, but rather as a new chapter in which the same discipline that once defined his flying career can now support his family and community through what he openly called a long and uncertain road. For a man whose entire public identity was built around a single afternoon of extraordinary calm, this latest disclosure feels less like an ending and more like a continuation of the same instinct that guided him on January 15, 2009. He is choosing, once again, to walk toward a difficult moment in full view rather than away from it, trusting that honesty will help others facing the same diagnosis feel less alone. Reports following his announcement emphasized that despite the diagnosis, Sullenberger remains committed to his lifelong mission of service, framing this new chapter as another test of the same steady character that once safely delivered 155 people back to solid ground. That instinct, friends say, has never really changed. Whether he was gliding a powerless aircraft toward the surface of the Hudson River, testifying before Congress about airline safety standards, or simply telling the public the plain truth about a difficult diagnosis, Sullenberger has consistently chosen clarity over spectacle. His decades of service, from a Texas farm boy who built model planes to a fighter pilot, an airline captain, an ambassador, and now an advocate speaking openly about Alzheimer's, form a single continuous story about showing up fully for the people who are counting on you. It is that same through line his family and friends say has carried him from the cockpit of Flight 1549 to this latest, quieter kind of courage. Those close to the family say Katie and Kelly have rallied around their father in the weeks since the diagnosis became public, describing a household that has always leaned on routine and honesty during hard moments, going back to the years when Sullenberger balanced a demanding airline schedule with ordinary family life in Danville. Rather than retreating from public view, he has continued granting interviews and issuing statements himself, choosing to remain the primary voice of his own story rather than letting others narrate it for him. That choice mirrors the same instinct that once made him walk the aisle of a sinking aircraft twice before allowing himself to leave. A final check to make certain everyone else was accounted for before he considered his own position. Whatever the coming years brings, the people who know him best say that same instinct for looking after others first is unlikely to change now. With this, we have come to the end of this video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, do well to like, comment, and subscribe for more content. To enjoy more thrilling stories, click now on the following video that pops up on your screen.